Well, hi there. Welcome to this webcast, little meditation and then a talk. And tonight's talk is on wise speech, how to be kind and tell the truth, which I always thought was mutually exclusive. But before we begin, a quick thank you to the Insight Meditation Community of Washington for hosting this, to our producer, Glenn Harrison. IMCW's got all kinds of retreats and programs and support for your practice. Big thank you to Rita Moran, our mindful movement leader, who leads mindful movement starting at 6:30 Eastern Standard Time, which brings you right up to now, which is 7:30 Eastern Standard Time, or 7:31 maybe. Let's see. I've got a newsletter. There's a weekly to let you know what's coming out, and then a couple times a year I send out a compendium of talks, upcoming retreats, and mostly my best photography, which is quite a passion of mine. And just to say before we launch, this is all offered in the spirit of generosity. So there's no charge, no paywalls. I have received so much in my own practice through the generosity of teachers and the generosity that's kind of included within this kind of Buddhist framework, where the teachings are considered so priceless that there shouldn't be a charge, but as they're given freely to support them as well. So if you ever feel inspired, I appreciate that. All right. Oh, let's see. Other shameless promotion. December 7th, Tara and I are leading a day-long retreat on keeping your heart open in perilous times. And in January 25th, I think, I'm going to be leading a day-long retreat on the most important thing, a deep reflection on the last year, what worked, what didn't work, what calls you, and then opening up your intuition to sense how you want to be with what lies ahead. So it's a great retreat. I've been doing it every year for the last many, many years. So feel free. All that stuff's on my website too. Okay, well, with that being said, let's explore one of the most profound ways to cultivate truth, which is to not speak. We're going to move into a little bit of silence, a little bit of practice. So feel free to move, stretch, let out any sounds. What posture would most support you in deeply relaxing and coming as present as you can possibly be? As you're ready, slowing down the breath. If you like, you can close your eyes. Take a few moments to sense what it's like to just soften. Soften the muscles around the eyes. Could you soften the muscles of the forehead? Could you relax your tongue? Let your tongue fill your lower jaw. You might explore what it's like to feel the weight of the arms. You can imagine your arms like heavy drapes, just hanging from your skull. Sensing down through the elbows and down through the wrists. You might take a moment to feel the backs of the hands. Feel the volume of the palms, the space between the fingers. If you bring your attention down into your belly, about 2 inches behind your belly button and 2 inches down toward your pelvis, what is it like to rest your attention here and simply to feel? Can you feel the breath very subtly down here in the core? If you bring your attention down into the soles of your feet and the heels, just to rest your attention here, what do you feel? Can you perceive any very subtle tingling or pulse or vibration here? And as you sense through the whole body, from the inside out, from the crown of the head all the way down through the soles of the feet, is there anything here that could soften or relax? Is there anything that could let go? You might now bring your attention to a particular point in the sense field. For many, it's the breath, the movement of the breath. And you might let your attention rest perhaps at the nostrils or the septum or the movement of the belly or a sense of the whole body breathing. And just to feel the in breath, pause, the out breath, and the pause. But you might also like to explore using sound as a focal point or an anchor, just to feel the sound vibrations right now as they're happening. Whatever you choose, for this next little while, let this be your invitation back to re-arrive. When you notice your mind lost in a narrative, take a moment to pause and take a moment to re-relax. Sense through the whole body what could soften or relax right now. And as you return to the point of your attention, the point of your concentration, what could relax here? Either relaxing the breath or relaxing into this perception of sound vibration. Letting yourself begin again. And you might gently inquire, can you sense what it's like for you to take the seat of the witness? Can you sense this quality of the observer, that which is aware? And you may find as you relax and as you simply notice what's here, that you might perceive the foreground of your anchor and the background of all that is changing, the phenomena that arise and pass away all by themselves, and yet you remain as the observer. There's a unique balance of paying attention, but at the same time, deeply relaxing and allowing. You might explore these two questions. Can you recognize and name what's happening right now? And can you let it be? In these remaining minutes, you might reflect on the following questions. Is there anything right now that could relax or soften? Is there anything that could relax or soften even more? And what would happen now if you dropped all technique and simply relaxed and let everything be just as it is? You might now very gently deepen your breath. Sense the space around you. You might again feel the breath, feel the sound vibrations as they are. Let your body move a little bit from side to side. Let your body stretch in any way that feels really good for you. Take this next little while for your transition. And welcome back. Back in my spiritual community days with 300 people kind of living under one umbrella, conflicts naturally would arise. And we used a formula for communication to sort of begin to sort of sort out the projections that we would lay on each other. And this particular formula started with gratitude. So you would say something you're grateful for, and the idea was that would kind of soften the ground. And then you kind of name the issue. You'd name what's not working, and then you'd have a request. That was kind of part of it. It was a pretty good formula, but not the best. I found one that's much, much better. But I just noticed how with this formula, when someone would stop me and say, I appreciate what a good listener you are, I would just automatically think, oh, Jesus, here we go. It was not exactly wise speech. In many ways, wise speech in our community was simply a more sophisticated tool for getting what you wanted. But you might take a moment and just reflect. Have you had a conversation recently that felt draining? Have you had a conversation that has felt you uplifted? It's very interesting how words can create worlds. Someone can offer me some gratitude and appreciation, and I can ride that for a long time. Or if someone unskillfully says something, I will carry that inside for an even longer time. In the Dhammapada, the early teachings of the Buddha, there's a quote that says, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. This is kind of the frame of this talk. A speech is not merely communication. It's actually an act of karma. That is to say, it's an expression of awareness or an expression of delusion, and it creates outcomes. So to be mindful of speech is a massive practice. Wise speech is like the knife in the hands of a surgeon. It can do amazing, amazing things and bring about great healing. A knife in the hands of someone who's angry, upset, reactive, delusional, not so effective. So I'd like to talk about four facets of wise speech that can be a doorway to awakening, a doorway not just to ourselves, but how we relate to each other. And that is first, truthfulness. What does it mean to tell the truth? How do you tell the truth? The second is kindness. Is it possible to convert your language to where it's kind? The third is usefulness. Is what you're going to say something that's actually actionable? And finally, timing. Is what you want to say, is it the right timing? So these are really four questions. Is what I'm going to say true? Is it kind? Is it helpful or useful? And is now the time? So I've been thinking about this, and I thought about a time when um, I got some really good, truthful advice from a good friend who it shifted things for me. I've always been incredibly ambitious. Part of that ambition comes from creativity and having lots of energy and possibilities and expression. Um, Part of it is from neurosis, trying to fill the black hole of being enough. You know, take on more, get a little more acclaim, take on more, get a little more acclaim. And it's kind of back to the four worldly winds in Buddhism of where we're unconsciously seeking fame or we're seeking to win, we're seeking for pleasure, we're looking for status, basically. So way back when, my gosh, way back when, 20 years ago, I had stepped in as president of a very, very large nonprofit in a time of crisis and poured my soul into it. Um, Not a very good executive, but I gave it a good shot. We did some good things. We didn't go out of business. That was my main claim. The walls were still standing when I left. But I had decided I was stepping down, and I kind of worked it out with the board where we would work the transition really mindfully, hand over the reins when we found the right people. It was, going to be 6 months or something like that. So naturally, as I was thinking about life after living in this spiritual community, because once you've been at the top, you really there's nowhere to go but somewhere else. I came up with all kinds of ideas. Ideas were not my problem. All kinds of possibilities. So I sat down with my good friend Len, who's quite a couple decades older than me and a very wise guy. And I told him that I was stepping down and that after this is after 24 years of being in this community, and I just decided I no longer want to be the guy in charge. I really, really want to be the guy showing up to teach. That's where my passion was. So I laid all this out to Len. And then he paused as he does, and he kind of smiled. And then he said, "This is great." I'll substitute a word that he used. This is what he said. He said, "Now I want to see if you have the huevos not to grab the first shiny thing." And that nailed it for me because I was looking for the next shiny thing. I was frantic for the next shiny thing. I had about 10 options that looked pretty shiny to me. And they were all in direct counterpoint to that black hole of not being enough. That reflection was so helpful for me because it reflected right back to me my fears and my neurosis. And that became a mantra for me. Don't grab the first shiny thing. Very, very grateful for his truthfulness because he could have offered platitudes, you know, he could have done a lot of things, but he just offered me some truth. There's a Zen saying that says, "See the truth like a bell struck once, clear, full, and complete." And it's very interesting when you think about it. When you feel tempted to distort the truth, the question is, can you pause long enough to feel what's underneath that impulse? I am one of the most non-aggressive, um, avoidance of conflict people around there. So telling the truth is really, really tough. And for me, when I'm tempted to distort the truth, what's underneath it is wanting to be liked, not wanting conflict. So the question becomes, how do we learn how to tell the truth? Lao Tzu said, "The truth is not always beautiful, nor beautiful words the truth." So it takes something special to tell the truth. And some people are real truth people. They don't have a problem at all. But if you have a problem with it, when you are aligned in truth telling, there's a certain alignment with the head and the tongue. And false speech kind of fractures our integrity. And if Len hadn't said anything, or if he had offered me a platitude, it would not have resonated. The truth liberates. When we conceal our deepest truth, we're bound by that. There's a phrase I love that says, "What you can't communicate controls you." There's so much in that. What you can't communicate controls you. Truth can be kind. You can be authentic without aggression, and that cultivates truth or trust. So he delivered his response with clarity, but also with a little bit of humor. So the question is, what do you do when you're struggling around telling the truth? Well, this is what the Buddha said to Rahula, his kind of assistant. He said, when you know that your words are untrue, harmful, or unbeneficial, you should refrain from speaking. There's something very powerful about that. Refraining from speaking can be an incredible refuge. Now, I grew up in a very, very Pennsylvania Dutch German community as a kid. And I remember in elementary school, we were told if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. There's a little bit of a difference between the two. One is just sort of like repressing, dramatically repressing what we're feeling. The other one is pausing to allow more clarity to arise before you speak. Truthful speech is a refuge. It grounds us in reality, but that means we've got to find out what is real, and that requires some mindfulness. So the challenge is, how do we speak honestly without harming? And this is where the question is what I'm about to say kind? A really, really interesting one. Before my parents passed, my mother was in a rehab center after a fall. My father was in a memory care unit. And in each of those cases, I was blown away by those who were taking care of them. Neither of them was happy where they were, but I watched how their words were really deeply soothing to both my parents. I understand that some people get upset when their parents, when they're really old and they're getting full-time care, they bond so deeply with their caregivers that the family feels left behind. But for me, it was such a deep sense of relief and a sense of really deep gratitude. And they actually became models for me for how I could as well offer comfort to my parents. There's a phrase from Zen that says, each word should have the fragrance of a lotus opening. There's a challenge. Every word should have the fragrance of a opening. Or as one of my great teachers said, think of the next thing you're about to say and ask yourself if it is an improvement on silence. And so it becomes a very interesting process of reflecting before you speak to ask first, is this true? What I'm about to say true? And is what I'm about to say coming from love or is it coming from fear? That pause and the listening can reveal a deeper internal structure of how you are in that moment and how you're speaking. In nonviolent communication, which is just a beautiful model, which trumps the model that we use back in the spiritual community. When you're in conflict, I like to think of this as four questions. The first question is, what do you both agree you're talking about? And what this forces you to do is to really pause and ask yourself, is how I'm describing it how the other person would describe it? So it forces you into a little bit of a role reversal. The second is, what do you feel? What are the feeling words? And this can be very challenging. I told the story of working with a couple, and I asked him to describe the situation, and he was struggling, but he tried to describe the situation, the conflict, and I was really moved by his intent. And so, with that kind of open-heartedness, I turned to his partner and I said, "When you hear this, what do you feel?" And she looked at me and she said, "I feel he's an idiot." To which I responded, "I'm not sure that's a feeling." Finding the language around honestly naming what you feel will point toward the pivot in communication and wise speech. And the pivot is from blame to self-responsibility and vulnerability. And that question is, what is the unmet need here? What are you needing? What are you wanting that didn't happen? And when you can get to that, there's a level of authenticity that's going to inform the communication. The fourth question is, what is a life affirming request? What could you ask that would move this forward? And what it's not is, so my request is you never do this again. The request might be, would you be willing to find a time to talk about this? Or would you be willing to tell me what this is like for you? Or if they're really close in, would you be willing to reflect back what I said so I know you heard me? So these questions, and I will offer a talk specifically on these because it is the most transformative model out there, I find. When in conflict, what do you both agree you're talking about? What do you feel? What do you imagine the other person feels? What were you hoping for that didn't happen? What do you imagine the other person was hoping for? And what would be a life affirming quest to move this forward? Now, it's interesting because when you bring kindness into communication, it amplifies the power of the truth that you're telling. Kindness is a strength. It requires courage to stay gentle, and it's all about mindful awareness. It's a practice. Noticing when you're speaking the tension that can arise, to breathe and to be kind and to explore what it's like to stay in relationship. The other element that's so powerful in wise speech from nonviolent communication is this very, very simple tool that opens up empathy. And that is whenever anyone speaks, to offer these words and then fill in the blank. I imagine you're feeling. No, I imagine you're feeling upset right now. Or I imagine you're feeling really good about what happened at work today. There's something about I imagine you're feeling that crosses the divide. It invites you to truly role reverse with another person, and they get that you're doing your best to get them. Marshall Rosenberg, who created nonviolent communication and brought it forward onto the planet in so many ways, hey, he said, when you practice this, it doesn't matter if you're wrong. And I thought, I'm not sure about that. But I've done this as a practice for many, many years now. I try to do it when I'm just out in the world. The story I often tell is in our local Safeway, toward the end of the day, checking out my stuff at the cashiers. And I, took a look at her and I just took a little risk and I said, well, I imagine you're feeling pretty exhausted at the end of the day. And she said, no, actually, I've got a friend who's coming home from college and we're going to go out partying tonight. And I'm so excited. I was totally wrong, totally wrong. And yet was able to cross that bridge to connection. So words that are seasoned with kindness, they can serve in a really powerful way. And this becomes the next question is what am I about to say useful or helpful? How do you use words as right action? Now there are a number of things here, but the first one is simply to ask is now a good time? Or when would be a good time? And the best example I can give is when I sort of stepped in as this I had mentioned before, I'd been president of a pretty big nonprofit. And I stepped in without a lot of experience. And we were going through a really hard time. And I had promised the board I would let 13 people go. And many of those 13 people were senior to me. They'd been there longer than me. And I was terrified, just terrified. And I talked to my best friend from college, and fortunately, he had a lot of experience. He had hired and fired people his whole career. His career was about hiring and firing people, and he worked up his own protocol for this, which I think probably a lot of people do. Because if you don't do it right, it's really, really messy. And he told me about a time when he had to hire his best friend in the company. He had to fire his best friend in the company. He didn't want to, but he had to. And he shared it with his friend, and his friend started crying. And then they were crying together in his office. And then his friend got angry, and it was just a mess. So the formula, if you have to fire people, this works out pretty well. I actually got comfortable with it after a while. Is you talk to them in person, you tell them up front, and you say, I just want to share something that you're not going to like, but um, we're going to have to let you go. There are a number of reasons why, but I want you to let you know that this is definitive, and I want you to take some time to reflect on it. And when we talk on Monday at 2 p.m., we'll talk about your transition and how we can make this transition really work for you. I've got a couple suggestions we might explore. And then you leave the office and you give them the dignity of processing on their own. Because if you don't, some people laugh, some people get angry, some people throw stuff around, some people shut down, but you give them the process, that time. So there's a quality of truth, there's a quality of kindness, and a quality of timing here. The other key, which I picked up from Chris Voss, who's a FBI negotiator, and he's shown up in a number of podcasts, but he's a brilliant guy. Talks a lot about communication. But one of the most powerful things when you have truth to tell is to let them know. And one of the most powerful things he said you can say to someone is, "You're not going to like what I'm about to say." There's a brilliance to that because you're giving forewarning. You're allowing them to do their internal adjustments. And then that opens up the possibility of speaking with some truth and kindness and possibly timing. Back to uh, the original sort of text of the Buddha. Speak at the right time of what is useful in accordance with the Dharma. So, so part of what that's really saying is for those like within that community, be aware of your timing. Be aware if it's useful and be aware if it's really truthful. Dharma is truth. I think we've all had experiences of communication that went awry, and maybe some communication that went really well. There's a Zen saying that says a single sentence can open 1,000 gates or close them. A single sentence can open up 1,000 gates or close them. So the question is what I'm about to say helpful? Will this heal? There's a Buddhist aspirational chant that translates as, may my words be medicine, not poison. May my words be medicine, not poison. And the question as well is it necessary to tell the truth? Not all truths need to be spoken. The other part of usefulness and timing is to ask yourself, is this something the other person can hear? That's a very powerful question. Sometimes that will sort of like end it. I've had that with some family members, some deep upset, some anger, a lot of history, and then really asking, is this something the other person can hear? And realizing, no. And then it becomes letting go of that communication and then finding a way to process whatever I need to process internally. And the only way we can really know is through empathy, to really know what's really helpful for the listener. So again, it requires a role reversal. So why speech is really compassionate action in verbal form. So timing. Can this person hear what I want to say? Is now the time? And there's lots of stories of how the Buddha was challenged a lot. He got a lot of hostility. A lot of people reactive to what he was teaching because what he was teaching was really quite radical. So they came at him with a lot of intensity. And for a lot of his response, he would just simply remain in silence. So to ask yourself, is what I'm about to say an improvement on silence? It's a really good one. It's making me pause right now intensively. Also, you may hear the dogs going insane. I'm not sure why. So when you feel the impulse to speak, to ask yourself, is what I'm about to say truthful? Is what I'm about to say coming from love or coming from fear? Is what I'm about to say helpful or useful? Is what I'm about to say in the proper timing? Is what I'm about to say something the other person can actually hear? So timing requires presence. Timing comes from deeply asking yourself, is this something the other person to role reverse and to really sense, is this going to work? Why speech is an art? It's the moment awareness moves into compassion. So, with truth and kindness, usefulness and timing, it becomes kind of a compass for your speech and for your awakening. This element of wise speech is not about moral perfection, it's about relational mindfulness in action. To speak only if it improves on silence. And you might explore over this next week or so, what would it be like to pause before you speak? I mentioned this before, but there's a wonderful book on the myth, the charisma myth. And the basic premise of this myth, written by a meditation person, is that you're born with charisma. But what she says, it's actually behaviors. And when you want to empower yourself, when you want to feel more empowered, she has a very, very simple practice. And that is when anyone is completed with their speaking, take one full second before you respond. Take one full breath before you respond. This has been one of the most transformational things for me because in that 1 second, and I will often try to lengthen a little bit, it actually creates a sense of respect that the other person feels heard. In that breath, it actually allows you to register what the person said, and it informs the response. Is my response based in truth? Is my response coming from love? Is my response kind? Is my response helpful and timely? There's something so powerful about slowing down, particularly in this relational field. So there are a number of things here. That's a very powerful, very pragmatic technique. The other technique, which is transformational, is whenever anyone speaks, try to imagine what they're feeling and then just say, I imagine you're feeling, and fill in the blank and see what happens. Why speech is about bridging the connection between each of us. And each one of us in our own way, in our own timing, feels like we are a wave utterly cut off from the ocean. And this can be a very powerful way through empathy, through kindness, to feel that we are all part of that same ocean. I hope you found this helpful. I certainly and deeply wish you well as you navigate your way through this relational field we're living in. Take good care and many, many blessings.